In the quiet stretches of Washington state, where rivers cut through valleys and the mountains loom with a rugged permanence, the Decker family tried to build what appeared from the outside to be a normal life. Travis Decker and his wife had once seemed like a typical couple, raising their three young daughters: Paityn, just 9 years old, Evelyn, 8, and Olivia, the youngest at 5. Their lives should have been filled with the simple joys of childhood, the warmth of school days, afternoons at the park, and bedtime stories. But beneath that surface, the family carried fractures that no one fully understood until it was too late. Suzanne, Travis's ex-wife, would later describe her daughters as bright, funny, and inseparable. Paityn was thoughtful, the kind of child who noticed when others were sad and tried to comfort them. Evelyn had an adventurous streak, always testing boundaries, laughing easily, quick to run ahead when the family walked together. Olivia, only 5, was still in the wide-eyed stage of childhood, asking endless questions, clinging to her sisters, idolizing them as protectors. Together, they formed a bond so strong that their mother believed nothing could break them apart. Travis had been their father, but the marriage had not survived. His relationship with Suzanne had collapsed under pressure, arguments, and what she later described as his instability. After their divorce, custody arrangements were tense, negotiated through the courts. Travis retained visitation rights, and in theory the arrangement was meant to give the children a connection with their father while keeping them safe. But Suzanne often worried. She had seen sides of Travis that unsettled her: the mood swings, the anger that simmered beneath his calm exterior, the sense that he was slipping into something darker. She raised concerns in court, citing his behavior and mental health. But visitation was still approved in late May 2025. As summer pressed into the Pacific Northwest, Travis was scheduled for a weekend visitation with the girls. Suzanne tried to keep her anxiety in check. She packed their things, reminded them she loved them, kissed them goodbye, and watched as Travis took them. She expected them home by evening on May 30th. The time agreed upon was 8 p.m. When the hour came and went, Suzanne's nerves sharpened. She tried calling, sending messages, waiting for an answer. Nothing came back. By the time night folded into morning, she knew something was wrong. For mothers, instinct often precedes evidence. Suzanne's gut told her that Travis had done something. She contacted authorities, explaining that her daughters were not returned, that she feared for their safety. Police began the process of locating Travis. What they would uncover over the following days would shake Washington, and soon the entire country. To its core, by June 2nd, the search had grown desperate. Officers scoured Chelan County, drawn to the area near Rock Island Campground after Travis's truck was spotted abandoned. The vehicle itself was a grim omen. A bloody handprint marked the tailgate, an image that would later sear itself into the investigation files: the shape of a man's palm. Stained in red, the DNA identified as Travis's. It was as though he had left a signature of violence behind. Unintentional, yet damning. Nearby, hidden in the brush, the bodies of the 3 girls were discovered. Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia, once so full of life, now lay robbed of breath and childhood. The scene was unbearable even for seasoned investigators. Plastic bags covered their heads. Zip ties bound their wrists. Autopsies later confirmed what the scene already suggested. The cause of death was asphyxiation, deliberate and cruel. To those who first found them, it was an image that would never leave their minds. Innocents destroyed with calculated brutality. News of their deaths spread quickly. The state of Washington reeled. Reporters carried the story across the nation, headlines blaring of the Decker children killings. People struggled to comprehend how a father could commit such an atrocity against his own children. The details, the plastic bags, the zip ties, were so chilling, so deliberate, that they transcended comprehension. It wasn't just murder. It was betrayal of the most profound kind, a violation of the sacred bond between parent and child. Suzanne's world collapsed. One moment, she had been a mother navigating the complexities of co-parenting. The next, she was a grieving parent whose worst fear had come true. She would later say that she had always worried about Travis, always feared what he might do, but she had never imagined the depth of his violence. Now she was left with unbearable silence, for bedrooms in her house that no longer echoed with the laughter of children, law enforcement launched a manhunt of extraordinary scale. Travis Decker was now the most wanted man in Washington. His background made the chase even more daunting. He had military training, survivalist skills, and an intimate knowledge of wilderness terrain. He could live off the land, evade capture, disappear into the forests and mountains that stretched endlessly beyond Chelan County. Officers from local, state, and federal agencies joined forces, combing the landscape with helicopters, drones, dogs, and ground teams. They searched caves, rivers, and remote campsites. Every lead was pursued, every sighting investigated, but Travis remained elusive. It was as though he had dissolved into the wilderness, leaving behind only the horror of what he had done. The public followed every development, watching press conferences, scanning headlines, discussing theories online. Some believed he had fled far, perhaps even left the state. Others believed he was hiding close, camouflaged by the very woods he had once explored as a soldier and outdoorsman. For Suzanne, the days became unbearable. She alternated between grief and rage, mourning her daughters while demanding justice. She spoke out, pleading for the capture of the man who had destroyed their lives. Her words resonated across the country, a mother's raw pain breaking through the noise of speculation and analysis. She demanded that people remember her girls not just for their deaths, but for their lives, their smiles, their voices, their personalities, their love. The Decker case became more than just a tragedy. It became a symbol of larger failures, the failures of systems meant to protect children, the blind spots in custody arrangements, the inability to foresee how far a disturbed parent might go. It raised questions about warning signs ignored, about red flags dismissed, about whether the deaths could have been prevented. But for now, all that remained was grief, a manhunt, and the chilling reality that the father of 3 murdered girls was still at large. The discovery of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia Decker's bodies on June 2, 2025, turned Washington into the epicenter of one of the most harrowing manhunts in recent memory. For investigators, the crime scene was both a conclusion and a beginning. They had found the children, lifeless and brutalized, but the man responsible, their father, was gone. The bloody handprint on his abandoned truck confirmed his presence at the site, but the empty driver's seat and the tracks leading into the wilderness pointed to a fugitive now on the run. Travis Caleb Decker was no ordinary suspect. At 32 years old, he carried the weight of military training and a background that made him uniquely dangerous to law enforcement. He had served in the armed forces, where he had been drilled in survival, stealth, and endurance. He was known to have experience living off the land, navigating difficult terrain, and enduring conditions that would break most people. It was precisely this background that turned the manhunt into a nightmare for authorities. Travis wasn't just hiding. He was equipped to vanish. The Chelan County Sheriff's Office quickly realized the scale of what they faced. They called in state police, the FBI, and eventually the U.S. Marshals Service. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights sweeping the thick canopy of trees. 9 units tracked since along riverbanks and into the foothills. Drones buzzed above the rugged terrain, scanning for heat signatures. On the ground, deputies fanned out with rifles and radios, moving slowly, methodically, through wilderness that seemed to swallow their efforts whole. But Decker's knowledge of survival gave him the upper hand. Reports emerged of possible sightings. A man resembling him slipping through a tree line, a lone figure moving near a campsite, a shadow by the river. But by the time officers converged, he was gone. Locals whispered that he was watching them from the trees, always one step ahead, using the landscape like camouflage. The Cascade Mountains, with their dense forests, jagged ridges, and endless hiding places, seemed to conspire in his escape. The murders had already horrified the public, but Decker's disappearance spread fear. News broadcasts replayed images of his face alongside photos of his daughters, reminding viewers of the atrocity he had committed and the reality that he was still at large. Parents held their children closer. Communities across Washington stayed on alert. Residents near Chelan County locked their doors at night, reported every strange sound, and avoided the backroads where Decker might still be hiding. As the manhunt stretched into weeks, theories flourished. Some believed he had died in the wilderness, his survival skills overstated, his end swift and quiet in the mountains. Others believed he had slipped past the perimeter entirely, vanishing into another state or even another country. His military past fueled speculation that he had prepared for this moment, stashing supplies, planning escape routes. Ready to disappear the moment he carried out his crime. For Suzanne, the grief of burying her daughters was compounded by the rage of knowing their killer remained free. She stood before cameras, her voice breaking as she demanded justice. She wanted him found, alive or dead, but above all she wanted him unable to hurt anyone again. Her words echoed across the nation. No mother should ever have to stand in her place, burying not one, not two, but 3 children stolen by the very man meant to protect them. Investigators shared her urgency, but the search tested their limits. The summer heat pressed down, complicating conditions for ground teams. The forests were vast, dotted with caves and abandoned cabins, threaded with rivers that could carry a man far downstream. Each lead drained resources. Each false sighting sapped morale. But the search continued, relentless, driven by the memory of the girls and the need to ensure Decker could not escape accountability in time. The manhunt became not just a law enforcement operation, but a cultural phenomenon. News outlets covered every update with urgency, true crime podcasts dissected the timeline, and online forums buzzed with speculation. People debated whether Decker was hiding in plain sight, whether he had help, whether he had planned his disappearance long before he killed his daughters. Amateur sleuths pored over maps of Chelan County, circling possible hideouts, comparing theories with the rigor of detectives. But for all the speculation, the reality remained. Travis Decker was gone. His absence became its own haunting presence, a ghost that lingered in every wooded shadow. The longer he remained at large, the more people feared what he might do next. Could he strike again? Could he take more lives? The idea that a man capable of murdering his own children might be wandering free was almost too much to bear. As July turned to August, the manhunt began to resemble a stalemate. Law enforcement refused to scale back, but resources stretched thin. New tips arrived daily, many of them dead ends. The FBI issued wanted posters, plastering Decker's face across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. His image stared out from gas stations, grocery stores, and rest stops, sharp-eyed, clean-shaven. The face of a killer and fugitive. A reward was offered for information leading to his capture, but even money couldn't coax out the truth of his whereabouts. Through it all, Suzanne clung to the memory of her daughters. She spoke their names in interviews, reminding the world that they were not just victims, but children with dreams, with voices, with futures. She wanted people to remember their smiles, their laughter, their uniqueness. She wanted the world to know who they were, not just what had been done to them. By the end of the summer, hope that Decker might be captured alive began to fade. The wilderness had swallowed him, and with it, answers. But still, investigators pressed on, unwilling to let him vanish without resolution. They believed the land would eventually reveal him, whether alive, clinging to survival. By September, the Decker manhunt had stretched past 100 days. The forests of Chelan County had been scoured repeatedly, the rivers dragged, the skies searched from above. Investigators were exhausted but unwilling to let the case grow cold. For many of them, it wasn't just about capturing Travis Decker anymore. It was about justice for Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia, whose faces still stared from news broadcasts and vigil candles across Washington. Then, on September 18, 2025, a break. Deep in rugged terrain, far from trails and campsites, searchers discovered human remains. The body was badly decomposed, the work of heat, scavengers, and time. The location matched the pattern investigators had suspected: remote, concealed, a place only someone with survival knowledge might reach. Alongside the remains were fragments of clothing and gear, items that bore resemblance to those Decker was believed to have had when he fled. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation and the public. Was this finally Travis Decker? Had the fugitive father who had suffocated his own daughters succumbed to the very wilderness he thought he could master? Or was this another cruel twist, another delay in the pursuit of closure? The Chelan County Coroner's Office quickly cautioned against certainty. The body was in such poor condition that immediate identification was impossible. Dental records, fingerprints, the usual tools of confirmation, had been compromised by decomposition. Only DNA could tell the truth, and DNA testing would take time. Yet, just days later, the U.S. Marshals Service filed a court document declaring Travis Decker deceased. The language was striking. They believed the remains belonged to him. They pointed to the location, the personal items, the circumstantial connections. To them, the case was closed. But law enforcement on the ground and the coroner's office bristled. Without DNA, nothing was definitive. They urged patience, insisting that science, not speculation, would provide the answer. The conflicting reports created chaos in the media. Headlines declared Decker dead one day, then questioned it the next. Families of the victims were left in limbo, unsure whether to believe the federal declaration or wait for forensic certainty. For Suzanne, it was torture. She had already endured the unimaginable, burying her 3 daughters, and now she faced the possibility that the man who had killed them was gone, or worse, that he might still be alive. She told reporters she wanted the truth, not speculation. She wanted DNA, cold and irrefutable. Until then, she would not believe. The public, too, was split. Some clung to the hope that the nightmare was over, that Travis had died in the wilderness, alone and broken. Others distrusted the sudden declaration, pointing out that Decker had already proved himself elusive, already slipped past massive search efforts. Online forums lit up with conspiracy theories. Perhaps Decker had staged the remains. Perhaps he had vanished further. Perhaps he was still out there, planning his next move. The lack of finality only fueled speculation. Behind the scenes, forensic scientists began their work. Samples were taken from the remains, shipped to labs equipped with advanced testing. DNA comparison would be run against Decker's known profile. The process was painstaking, each step precise, each result double-checked. Investigators and families waited in limbo, their lives suspended by the ticking clock of science. The coroner, pressed by reporters, clarified the situation. They explained that until DNA confirmed identity, the remains could not be officially tied to Decker. They cautioned against misinformation, against premature conclusions. Their statements frustrated some who wanted closure, but reassured others who demanded accuracy. Truth, they said, required patience. For Suzanne, patience was impossible. She replayed the timeline endlessly in her mind. The last time she saw her daughters. The day they were supposed to be returned. The hours of silence. The moment police told her they were gone. And now, the image of remains deep in the forest, possibly the man who had destroyed her life. She wondered if death had come too easily for him. If it was fair that he might escape trial, escape accountability, escape hearing her voice in a courtroom demanding justice. Meanwhile, vigils for the girls continued. Their names were spoken in churches, written on posters, painted on signs. Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia, the sisters who should have grown up together, who should have played on playgrounds and laughed at sleepovers, who should have lived. The community clung to their memory even as the case dragged on. Investigators kept their focus. They knew the public was restless, but they also knew that only confirmation mattered. They guarded the remains, processed evidence, compared details. The work was slow but essential. They owed Suzanne, the children, and the entire state the truth. And so, September ended with questions instead of answers. Remains had been found. A declaration of death had been filed. But the DNA had yet to speak, and until it did, the Decker case remained suspended in uncertainty. Was Travis Decker dead, finally undone by the wilderness? Or was the most wanted man in Washington still out there, unseen, waiting? In the weeks after the discovery of human remains in Chelan County, Washington, the Decker case entered a strange twilight. On paper, the U.S. Marshals Service had declared Travis Caleb Decker dead. But in the homes of grieving families, in the offices of detectives, in the coroner's lab, and in the minds of a public gripped by fear, the question remained unresolved. DNA testing was still underway, and until the results returned, nobody could say for certain whether the most wanted man in Washington had truly met his end. The uncertainty made the grief harder to carry. For Suzanne, the mother of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia, every day without confirmation was another day of torment. If Travis was dead, then perhaps the nightmare had closed. But if he wasn't, if the remains belonged to someone else, then the possibility of his return remained, a shadow lingering outside the door. She lived with that duality. mourning her daughters while glancing over her shoulder, haunted by the thought that the man who had stolen them might still be alive. The public, too, felt the tension. News outlets offered conflicting coverage, one headline declaring Decker's death, another cautioning restraint. Talk radio hosts debated whether the government had rushed to declare closure. Online communities spun theories, some suggesting Decker had staged his disappearance, others insisting the remains were proof enough. The contradictions created an environment where truth seemed just out of reach, where every explanation carried doubt. For law enforcement, the waiting was agonizing but necessary. Investigators who had chased Decker through the wilderness wanted finality. They wanted to know whether their quarry had escaped or succumbed. Yet they also knew that forensic science took time, and that rushing would only undermine the credibility of the case. So they waited, fielding questions from reporters, reminding the public that answers would come, but only when the DNA spoke. Meanwhile, Suzanne's daughters were remembered in ways that transcended the crime. At schools, classmates created memorials filled with drawings, flowers, and notes. Teachers shared stories of their laughter, their curiosity, their friendships. At candlelight vigils, people spoke their names aloud: Paityn, Evelyn, Olivia. Each name was a reminder that this story was not only about a father-turned-murderer, but about 3 young lives erased before they could grow. The tragedy reshaped conversations about family courts and visitation rights. Critics asked how a man with documented instability, with warning signs flagged by his ex-wife, had been allowed access to his daughters unsupervised. They argued that the system had failed to protect the most vulnerable, that safeguards had been too weak, that the law had underestimated the danger posed by Travis Decker. Lawmakers began to speak about reforms, about tightening rules for custody arrangements where threats were present, about placing the safety of children above all else. But reforms, however necessary, could not erase the horror. They could not bring back 3 girls whose futures had been stolen. They could not heal Suzanne's broken heart or silence the nightmares of those who had found the bodies. They could only acknowledge the cost, hoping to prevent another family from living the same nightmare. As autumn settled over Washington, the results of the DNA testing were still pending. The coroner maintained that positive identification would come only from science, and until then, official confirmation of Decker's death could not be given. The delay kept the wound open. Suzanne tried to focus on her daughter's memories rather than the man who had taken them, but the shadow of his absence, or presence, loomed constantly in the broader world of true crime. The Decker case became a touchstone. Documentaries dissected the timeline, podcasters pored over the details, and writers explored the psychological descent of a father who killed his children. Some tried to understand his motives. Others refused to give him the dignity of analysis. For most, the story was a stark reminder of how domestic violence and control can escalate to the unthinkable. It was a cautionary tale written in the lives of 3 girls who should still have been alive. The legacy of the case lies not only in the horror of the murders, but in the resilience of those who carried on. Suzanne, though broken, continued to speak publicly, determined that her daughters would be remembered not as victims, but as vibrant children who had been loved beyond measure. Communities rallied around her, raising funds, offering support, ensuring she was not alone. Her daughters' names were etched into plaques, their memories held in ceremonies, their short lives honored by those who refused to let them fade. In time, DNA will provide the answer. It will confirm whether the remains belong to Travis Decker, whether the fugitive father who murdered his daughters died in the wilderness, or whether questions still linger. But even when the result comes, it will not erase the devastation. It will not restore what was lost. It will not undo the betrayal that shattered a family and horrified a nation. The Decker children killings will forever be remembered as one of the darkest chapters in Washington's history, a story of innocence destroyed, of systemic failures, of a father-turned-predator. Yet within that darkness, the light of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia continues to shine. They are remembered in drawings, in photographs, in whispered prayers, in the enduring love of a mother who will never stop saying their names. And though the wilderness may or may not have claimed their killer, the truth remains unshakable. He could never silence the memory of the daughters he betrayed. Their story lives on, a haunting reminder, a call for vigilance, a plea for change. Paityn, Evelyn, Olivia, 3 sisters, bound in life and in memory. Gone, but not forgotten.